Hello, hola, and welcome to the Audacity of Joy podcast, where we answer the central question: what role does joy have in our work to promote justice, transformation, and healing? I'm your host, Jennice Chewlin, public health champion, entrepreneurial activist, affectionately named La Reina of Joy, and CEO of the workplace wellbeing consultancy, Chewlin Group. In this podcast, you'll hear from changemakers, creatives, and leaders who are using joy as a strategy for change, celebration, and challenge. Each episode offers real talk about burnout, recovery, and the courage to choose joy in spaces that often forget it. Listen to spark curiosity, reflection, and action. This isn't about ignoring struggle. It's about daring to imagine differently. It's a movement helping change makers rediscover joy as a tool for well-being, resilience, and healing. Because one thing for sure is that joy helps us hold both pain and the possibility. It builds capacity for empathy, creativity, and courage. The same tools needed in leadership and change making. Listen and subscribe to hear from leaders explore how joy shows up in their lives, work, and how they lead. Thank you to our sponsor, Chewlin Group, who is on a mission to bring the audacity of joy to transform organizations to become drivers of health and well-being, to build trust, collaboration, and impact. Welcome, everybody. I am so excited that you are joining us today for this episode with a special friend of mine that I can't wait to introduce you to. This is Dr. Tiffany Manuel, affectionately known as Dr. T. She is a truth teller, bridge builder, and lifelong believer in the power of people to create a more just and joyful world. For more than 30 years, she has walked alongside courageous leaders and good troublemakers who dare to imagine what's possible for their communities. She is the president and CEO of The Case Made, and Dr. T works across the country and the world to help leaders build stronger support for the big ideas that make all our lives better, from affordable housing to health equity to racial justice. Dr. T, welcome to the show.
Oh, Janice, thank you so much for that warm welcome. I cannot wait to have this conversation.
Yes, and I invited you here. I would love to share with listeners how we met, which is I was in attendance of the Endowment for Health, New Hampshire's Endowment for Health annual meeting, and you were the keynote speaker, and
Mhm.
you had us shaking our seed packets. Can you give us a little background for our listeners to, uh, you know, understand the picture I'm drawing here about shaking our seed packets?
Absolutely. So sometimes, I will share when I go to different groups, seed packets, because I think there's something that is so, I think, hopeful and aspirational about planting a seed, right? If that there's hope, there's faith, there's aspiration. I mean, you can't see the actual plant that's going to emerge, but from this little small kind of version of life, you're planting something, watering it, like nurturing it in the faith or the hope or the aspiration that what comes out of it is going to be absolutely beautiful. And I think that is a great way for us to think about our work in the social justice field. Many of us have been working for a long time to bring policies and capital and resources to our work, and we are actively planting those seeds and nurturing them and with the hope and aspiration that they become right, something wonderful and beautiful for the communities that we serve. And so the seed packet is really just a reminder of that, right? Of that process, of the kind of evolutionary process of life and what I hope we're seeding back into the field of social justice.
I think that explains it beautifully, what that reminder is, and I've kept my seeds with me.
I love it.
Yeah, and it was a good conversation to even have with my kids around, like, "Where'd you go today, mom?" And I got to
Mhm,
explain to them
mhm,
that change-making work, when we want to build something different
mhm,
and beautiful and have that blue sky thinking about what it's
mhm,
gonna take, we need to remember that, to your story about your mom or your grandmother about
Mhm.
being out in the storm and saying,
Exactly.
I'm planting my seeds. You know, we don't know what the outcome is going to be. We don't know if we're going to get enough water, rain, and sun, but we're going
Mhm.
to plant anyways. And I think this brings a nice bridge to the topic at hand, which is we're answering the question and we're helping our audience have some inspiration, motivation around joy seeking and why we need to make the case for joy. And I'd love to hear from you, Dr. T, if, you know, do you believe that your change making work and the organizations that you work with, is there room for joy in the social impact sector, in the change maker, the good troublemakers?
Absolutely. And I think, Jenny, I think that is such an important and sort of relevant question for the moment that we're in, because I think that we're in a moment that feels really hard for a lot of folks, and especially for those of us in the social justice field, where the policies that seem to be making their rounds are not the ones that we feel are the ones that are going to nurture human talent and potential in our country or in the world. And so it's a moment where we're watching also a lot of the progress in the civil rights movement and the reproductive rights movement and the social justice. I mean, just across these sort of important movements be dismantled. And that's really hard to watch. And so your question about whether or not you can be joyful in a moment where you're watching the dismantling of some of the most basic human rights, right, is really tough. And my answer to that would be not only is it appropriate and relevant, but joy is essential, right? If you joy is kind of like the clearest indicator of hope. Like that's the clearest indicator that something aspirational in the human spirit is still available to us. And so from my vantage point, if we're not joyful, having a sense of joy, exuding joy in some way, shape, or form, then number one, we're cheating ourselves out of the moment of that joy that we deserve, but also we're not fueling the movement for what comes next. Right? People don't, in a moment like this, get excited about resistance and to get excited about dreaming and imagining forward without a sense of possibility and joy. It's not a luxury to be joyful. It's not a challenge to be joyful. I think it is an opportunity to the world that we need to build. And I can say a lot more of that. I just think that, what's challenging is how to find that balance between sort of righteous indignation when you look at stuff that's happening and also joy. Like those two things come together. And sometimes we struggle to have those things have balance in our conversations, in our energy mode. I'm a big believer in sort of energy and vibration. It's hard to balance those, but I would say this is the moment where, yeah, your opportunity as a leader, demonstration as a leader is the ability to exude both those things and that balance. So absolutely.
And I like that you're honing in on the fact that it's both and,
That's right.
right? It's both addressing the devastation and from what I keep hearing the word nurture, right? Like
Mhm,
we need to
mhm.
nurture ourselves, the people who are in the work. And one way of doing that is joy.
Absolutely.
Now, what would do you say to people are who have a hard time maybe saying, because of guilt, shame, etc. What do you say to people who have a hard time feeling that they can even have the capacity to seek joy or practice?
Yeah, I think, it's funny because I think the folks that I work with are folks who are in that spirit, mostly of the sort of righteous indignation. They're just devastated by how much of what we feel like is about nurturing people is being taken away. But I totally appreciate that question of like, what do you say to folks who just are having a hard time getting there? Like, I can't be joyful. I would say that if you can't get there for yourself, because sometimes just thinking that can feel very selfish, right? To have a sense of joy when other folks are in deep pain. What I always tell people or try to get people to see is that there's an opportunity if you think outside of yourself. When you think about what others around you need, like as a leader, I'm a leader in the field, I'm a leader for folks who are doing very difficult work under very difficult circumstances. They need my joy, right? They need me. They're carrying a lot of people. And so the last thing I want to do is be the Debbie Downer, right? That's reinforcing this being a sort of wreck on a wreck, right? It's a wreck, and you want to be the thing that topples that, people's sense of urgency and agency and aspiration. So when I get in my feelings or I see other people in their feelings, but I can't get there, when you ask people to think outside of their own personal interests and think about the folks around them and what they need, a lot of folks that I work with are able to get there, right? So if you're working with single moms who are struggling right now with unbelievably difficult circumstances and they're getting cut off SNAP benefits and their health care is going away and all of that stuff, the last thing they need is somebody who, comes into their lives and can't access a sense of joy or bring some joy to the experience. So if you can't get there for yourself, then get there for others. And that usually is what helps people to do that.
That's a beautiful strategy and a reminder that we always, right, as caregivers, as people in the work changing movements and minds and
Hmm.
hearts, we have to remember that it's both an individual and
Hmm.
collective process. And
Hmm.
so I like your idea of you yourself, you're that light for others, the spark that of just what we need. And I believe, I am that as well for others. And it's important to help remind folks that find people who are, if you can't be it, who is someone that can help ignite a small spark for you. Dr. T, can you share a little bit more about your work and maybe a particular, memory of how you yourself as a leader in your sector use joy as a strategy?
Absolutely. So I am the president and CEO, and I would say the founder of the Casemate, which is an organization with change makers all across the country who are trying to make the case for some version of justice, some version, whether it's in the health space or the housing space or the environment or some version of, children's health or whatever it is. They're trying to make the case for policies or programs or supports or capital that would help nurture the communities, the human potential that's in our communities. And so that I would say overall, I would say is an optimistic exercise. Like if you're trying to present something that you think can really help, right? You automatically get folks who are, even if they're not in their joyful selves, they are in their aspirational selves. Like, how can we do this? How can we make a better case for it? To some extent, I normally get to work with folks who are at least kind of in the vein of their aspiration, their biggest aspiration. The thing that I do at the Case Made, and I work with a team of folks who we work on this together, is to help people understand what moves people out of just the general idea of a, aspiration or a case that they're trying to make, all the way into getting other people excited, joyful, willing, able, right? How do you get people around you, not just you have an idea for the case that you want to make, but everybody around you is excited about the case? How do you do that? And joy is a part of that strategy, right? It's the first principle of strategic case making, which is the framework that we use, is about leaning into people's aspirations, about being asset framed. We don't start with problems. We start with what is it that you love about the community that you live in, right? Because people will grabble and they say, "Ah, grabble, 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 grabble." Okay, I get all that. But what is it that you love about being here? If there's one thing you would say that you just love about this place, what is it? And people will say things like, "Well, I mean, this is a really walkable community, and I love the fact that, at any given time I can go outside and I got a bunch of neighbors who are just walking around and people are really, really friendly. Like they just kind of want to have a conversation. And I love that about this community." And so when you start to talk about that, like, okay, well, tell me more about that. Like, how does that work? Like what supports that? When people start to talk about what they love, it changes their whole kind of perspective. It literally shifts them out of an energy of problem focus to an energy of excitement. And we work with them to figure out how to continue to move people in that pathway. So when I think about joy as an expression, like that's the first thing. Like, what do you love? What's exciting? What's amazing about this place? When you get people in the energy of that, you get them to move differently in the space of the things that you need them to do. Quite frankly, it's easier to pull them forward, right? In terms of your call to action if they're leaning forward out of a sense of joy and aspiration. So as opposed to being, problem centered, we have to solve this big problem and that's really hard and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's carrying the message again about both and. You're recognizing that there are issues
Mm-hmm.
that are contributing to this problem, and you're also proud about some parts of this
Hmm.
city. I was just at a community conversation yesterday, And that
Mhm.
was one of the questions. What makes you proud about raising your family here?
Mhm.
And we had a lot to say about it. And as
Mhm.
people nodded, it's like, you see what I mean, right? And one of the things I talk a lot about, in my work and bringing joy as a strategy is that the word itself, joy, is a sweet invitation for
Mhm.
curiosity. What do you mean? Or sometimes I also describe to people that if the word joy is too far away, there are words that complement it too, like proud,
Mhm.
wonder, free, and, so many other, successful, inquisitive. I'm looking at the feelings wheel, which is a
Mhm.
tool I often use. And I think that's one way to also approach the invitation to people around joy who
Mhm.
might have a harder time seeing the strategy for it. And I reread the beautiful article post you wrote in your Substack called
Mhm.
Be Done with the Anxiety of This Season.
Mhm.
And Dr. T, you wrote this a year ago
Mhm.
to maybe the day. Tomorrow will mark 1 year that you
Mhm.
shared this. And you go on and share why using joy in your work of transformation of cities, coalitions,
Mhm.
health equity, housing. You talked and you made the case for joy as a
Mhm.
form of resistance, a bridge builder, and as a reflection of the world we want to create. And
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you can share for folks who haven't got a chance to read this, a summary of what your intention was, which was now a year ago, and the
Mhm.
season of distress and
Mhm.
uncertainty almost feels like the roots have gotten deeper.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I wanna double tap on what you said in terms of just joy as a sweet invitation. I love that language in my work. I often talk about just when I'm talking to case makers, I'm often saying to them, be careful with your words because they are an invitation, right? And they invite people in. They tell people who belongs. They signal, right, who's welcome, and so, in my work, that means often I go to folks who will hire my firm to do some work with them, and I go to their website, and it's so jargon filled. I'm like, so let's just think about this. Who's being invited here, and also who's being excluded, right? Because if you don't know all of the terminology and the abbreviations, and right, then you can't be a part of the conversation that's happening, or in the keynote that you do, or in the community building that you're doing. If you're talking in ways that only certain folks can understand, then that's also saying who's not invited, right? So be careful because your words are literally an invitation to be a part of something, to be welcomed, or to keep people out. And so we work on that. Like, how do you embody that? And some of that is joy. How do you embody that sense of like aspiration? How do you embody that just in the words that you use? So I love that language of being is a sweet invitation that from my vantage point, it's also not just the words, it's also the energy that you give those words. And that's part of where joy is, that feelings where you talked about. Right. You can say words and it can be empty, but when you task those words that are inviting, that are opening, that people can understand, that people have a sense of accessibility to, and you combine that with a sense of joy, and people can feel that, right? You can feel when you're in the presence of somebody who's just vibrating at a level of like, welcoming and just joy. And you can feel it. It's not something you don't have to say it, right? You can feel it, right? So when you combine those two things together, the outcome of that is just amazing. It's almost like having a superpower. And that's what I was trying to embody in that post. Like, folks, we are missing out on one of the clearest superpowers that we can be deploying at this moment to address a whole range of issues if we're not tapping into the feeling of joy. It's a part of the words that we're sending out to make our case for change. So I talked about that, joy as a bridge builder, as a strategy, I mean strategically. And I specifically wanted to give very, very thoughtful examples of where that strategy has won. Because I think that sometimes when we talk about these issues, the conversation can feel so esoteric, right? It can feel like, oh yeah, oh joy, sure. I'm bouncing around giving joy. But how does that really relate to real advances in social movements? Like, how does that really lead to policy change. Like sometimes the people need you to put the dots really close together all the way out so they can see the relationship between the joy that they experience and they exude all the way out to the way that that shapes larger macro events and larger macro circumstances. So I wrote that article as a way to say, listen, folks, I'm not just blowing smoke your way or just saying that go out and be happy and joyful because it's just, right. Because I want to say that I'm a social scientist. What that means is I study behavior, I study people, I study institutions over time and pull out the lessons that are embodied there. And one of the lessons that we know is those movements that have had joy at the center, they just go so much farther. Their impact is so much greater. And I just wanted people to see that and feel that again, especially in a moment right now that feels really, really tough for folks.
Yeah, and a reminder that we've been here before in this season of hard and dismantling. And you're right. You wanted to make the case by giving clear examples, and I
Mhm,
think you did. You were successful in doing that.
mhm,
I think so. If folks want to read more, I hope they visit your Substack and read. Be done with the anxiety of this season. I think
mhm.
that was great. Dr. T, could you define what's your definition of joy? Because it is very different for everyone.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think oftentimes people I'm gonna back into it because oftentimes I think people don't distinguish between being happy and joyful. Like happy is something that is usually, triggered by something, an event that takes place. You get a new job or your kid does something great and you're happy about that. And there's an emotional feeling about that. And they confuse joy about that. And that's the reason why sometimes they have a hard time getting to joy because they think I have to be happy all the time. I have to bounce around all the time and, you know, as an emotion, but joy, I think, is having just a sense of not only just a sense of calm, but a sense of internal wellness, right? That there's a sense that things are going to work out exactly the way they should. There's a sense of, and I hope not all listeners, I'm sure, have a spiritual relationship, but for me, there's a spiritual component to that, being sort of connected to the divine and connected to something bigger than myself that allows me to know that all things are in right order, all things are connected and there's a sense of just both calmness about that, but just like again, for me, I think it's sort of the aspiration, like that seed packet that we talked about at the very beginning. Like when you plant that, there's a sense of joyfulness and aspirational. Like you just know that things are working out exactly in the way they're supposed to be, and you bring a sense of levity, like there, right? That comes from the inside out. It's not outside in, like events that happen outside of me, and then I get happy about that. It's something that radiates from inside out, right? You have the feeling and the energy of that, and because of that, you're radiating that outward. And so there are lots of practices that I work through that help me to sort of get there consistently. I'm a big person in meditation. Whenever I feel like my spirit is anxious or nervous or afraid or fearful, I take myself offline, right, to get that kind of meditation. And for a lot of people, meditation is something that takes practice. People go, I sat down and my brain was just going too fast and I couldn't concentrate. And I'm like, I know, but it's also a muscle, just like you didn't go to the gym, right, one time and like lift all the things and
Mhm.
like get this amazing. Like that's not how it happens. You go to the gym over and over and over again. Over time, you develop a practice that allows you to develop all kinds of muscles and get toned and all the things that you want. So that kind of like meditation, like keep doing it, keep working through it, being quiet, like being in the stillness. For me, even music, when I listen to like meditative music and just sit in the stillness, it takes a while, but after a while, the joy that comes through from having that kind of meditative session is absolutely amazing. I would imagine that other people do other kinds of practices like yoga and other kind of that allow them to just get quiet inside, experience that kind of joy and then radiate that out. But for me, it really is about finding those practices that get me right back into that joy state. And I will tell you that if I'm feeling anxious or fearful and afraid, I go into that meditative state. When I come out of that, I'm just gonna tell you, like I am just a whole nother person. And I'm able to be that for all the things for my family, for my community, for the work that I do. And I get to show up differently in that space. So maybe for you, Denise, I'd love to hear from you. Like, what are some of the sort of joy-filled practices that allow you to connect to that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point that there are practices to
Mhm.
joy. It's because I was in such a deep, dark place, from COVID, a job transition,
Mhm.
that I started to question my experience with joy. For much
Mhm.
of my life, like to your explanation, I confused joy with happiness. But
Mhm.
crawling out of that hole, reading and talking to people, I realized quickly that I was wrong. I got it wrong. And
Mhm.
so began my practice with joy. And you'll
Mhm.
hear many people say that it's simple, small acts. It's not a $1,000 cruise to the Bahamas.
Exactly.
Hello, that would be nice or fun, but it wasn't going to be my center for joy. So, because of COVID and how the world slowed down, to your point, when you meditate, your brain slows down. When the
Mhm.
world slowed down, I began to take stock on what was good in my life. I started a gratitude practice that
Mhm.
now has, motivated doing it with my children. And so for me, it's a lot of self reflection. I always say that gratitude blooms joy.
Yes, I love that.
And taking stock nightly on three good things that happened to me is a practice that has helped me center even after uncertainty or a bad day. There are small things that happen to me that I know I can appreciate. And then
Mhm.
and another thing for me has been movement. Things right now can shake you. They can
Mhm.
make you feel like your car is hitting those guardrails. And when that happens for me, I say, I need to go.
Mhm.
Where can I move? And I picked up running recently. I had never been a runner, but doing that, something new, helped my brain, rewire itself in new ways and dismantle thoughts and things that I perceived about myself in running that have built that muscle of, I can do this. I'm slow and that's okay. And so
Mhm.
after I finish, woo, I feel good. I tap into parts of me that make me say, I'm going to do this again. And
Mhm.
so those are some of the practices that I do.
Mhm. I love that. I love that. Yeah, and I wanna just also again just double tap on what you were saying about just that it's not about the things, people so many of us because we live in a world where, as they used to say, cash rules everything around me, that they're, the sort of capitalism as a thing requires people to have resources to be able to do the things they need to do, to have the house, the car, the job, etc. It's easy to get wound up in sort of those things that you need, quote unquote, need to have as a precondition for joy. Right. And
Mm,
so, what happens when you don't have those things, right? What happens when the house that you thought you wanted doesn't emerge, or the car that you thought you should be driving, or the
yep.
job that you thought you deserve, but doesn't happen? I think that's really the biggest kind of indicator of joy. Joy is not contingent on those things. Those things are not. Happiness might be. You might be happy, like you said, to get that cruise or to have that nice house or promotion or car, and those are wonderful things. And if you are
Yeah.
experiencing those things, have at it. Lean into it. But when you are able to disconnect the right joy, your sense of joy from that kind of outer experience, that's when like you are fully leaning into the notion of that. Like your finger is right on the pulse of joy. Like it doesn't require that. The things that bring you real joy are the things that really don't cost any money. They don't really, right?
Yeah.
They just don't, right? And once you figure that out and you find a way, like we're talking about, to engage in those practices that don't really cost you any money, but just allow you to engage the innermost vibration of joy in your mind. Like it literally is. You feel like almost a different person. You feel like and I think about all these folks who go to they go and get a guru or they go and get somebody else. When the people say that kind of stuff, all they're really saying is I'm trying to find somebody who helps me to connect to that innermost part of myself that is not related to how much money in my bank, not related to how I'm going, not related to any of those things, but just related to me and my health. That's the thing. And it takes like we talked about, it's a practice, right? So you got to practice it. So, for those folks I would say who are listening who don't yet have a practice, start small. If it's running, if it's dance, if it's, whatever it is that allows you to take yourself like kind of offline a little bit and connect there. Man, you live a different life when you can do that.
Yeah, I love that. And to kind of summarize, because we're talking about how we can use joy as a
Mhm,
strategy for challenges,
mhm,
change, and celebration. Our conversation has led us to hit up on the notion of both and that
mhm,
there isn't going to be a perfect time to say, okay, now I'm ready for joy. It really is
mhm,
about making the space for it, even
mhm.
when you're 10 toes down.
Yep.
Even when you're bracing and, fortifying yourself and community.
Mhm,
There's that notion is the notion of words do matter,
mhm,
the narrative that we tell ourselves about joy or the narrative
mhm,
we say, "Am I making room for joy in this work?" Especially if
mhm,
you're leading an
mhm.
organization.
Absolutely.
And then lastly, another thing I heard you say is you gotta make it a ritual. It's
Mhm,
nice,
mhm,
you might have a poster up on the wall, but what are the rituals, the practices that you are helping invite your team into so that they can have a pathway
mhm,
or opportunity for joy
mhm.
multiple times, throughout the year? Is there
Absolutely.
anything else I left off?
No, I think that's great. I think the thing I would wanna also just say, kinda introduce into this conversation is, I've been talking to folks a lot about the sort of polar opposite of joy, which is fear, and talking to folks in this moment about what fear does. And I think it's important because when you come out of fear and into a sense of joy, it unlocks some things strategically that fear takes away from you. So I've been talking a lot about when you were in a state of fear, right? But many folks, first of all, many folks don't even know that they're in it, right? You're operating out of a sense of fear, and you don't even know that your decisions are being predicated on your fears, not your aspirations, right? You don't
Mm,
even sort of, you're not even there. But the other thing, and I think it's directly related to this conversation, is when people are in the state of fear, when people are fearful, they don't dream, they don't imagine, they don't create, right? And so when we think about joy as a strategy and what it looks like strategically to deploy joy, is that you need that for the kind of work that we're doing, right? You need to access your creativity. You need to have access to your sense of imagination. You need your sense of possibility and wonder. And so strategically, the reason to go into one of those practices or rituals is because you want to be able to access the faculties that allow you to think bigger, to think strategically, to think more imaginatively, to think more collaboratively, right? So, it's not just an investment in you as an individual, it's an investment in your strategy, right? Because when you do that, my gosh, you see things that just, I hope your listeners are thinking about that. You see things that you couldn't see before because your fear wouldn't let you do it. You see possibilities that just and pathways that just weren't available to you in a sense of fear or panic or anxiety. So when you find yourself in those situations where, so I say two things. One, just really getting aware, that awareness of what's going on in your own spirit. Are you operating out of a sense of fear? Right? Just really touch base. Take the time to touch base with yourself. Like, I'm making decisions. Am I making this? And let me just take a minute. Am I making this in fear? Or am I making this really out of a sense of joy, right? And forward thinking and aspiration. And if you decide that I'm actually probably operating out of a sense of fear, then those rituals and practices become even more important. Let me stop. Let me get hold of myself. Let me shift the energy that I'm operating from. And then once I do that, let me then go back and take that decision again. Is this the right decision to make? Are there other possibilities that I missed when I was in the sort of fear and anxiety? Are there things that I didn't think of or are there collaborations with people that I didn't even see that were possible because okay, now let me take that decision in joy. And if you can take those decisions in joy rather than fear, my gosh, I mean, it just, again, right, you just have more options open to you than would otherwise be possible. So, yeah.
thank you, because that is exactly what we're doing. We're making the case for using
Hmm.
joy as a strategy in
Hmm.
leadership, that
That's right.
big blue sky thinking. And we
Hmm.
can't tap into that if
Hmm.
we're in that fearful state over time. It,
That's right.
it makes sense. We experience fear, but over
Hmm.
time, exposing our body to it is affecting our brain. And you talk a lot about the slow brain,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so you're just not hitting on the tip of the iceberg around
Mhm.
how important it is to find practices and rituals to have that slow brain take
Mhm.
over that fearful side of
Mhm.
things. And
Absolutely.
thank you for
Absolutely.
closing that up because that is just so powerful. And the mission of this podcast really is to help our listeners identify people who are doing the work of
Mhm.
using joy as strategy for both themselves and the people that they are working with, activating, change making with. Dr. T, thank you so much for your time today to help us and activate ourselves to remember that joy is a strategy, not a luxury, not one that we can just hang up on the coat rack and then take off when there's time, but something that has to be baked in if we really want to do this work in a sustainable way and in a way that invites others.
Absolutely.
You're the
Thank you so
best,
much.
Dr. T. Thank you so much. I hope everybody enjoys this episode and stay tuned for the next one. Don't forget to like and share this episode and subscribe to the station. Take care. What a powerful reminder from Dr. T. Joy is not a luxury. Joy is part of the movement. It's essential. It's what makes our work sustainable. It's what makes our communities feel like home. If you're out there today feeling the heaviness of the world, I hope this conversation reminded you to be the person to spark joy and make space for it. Keep planting those seeds because the harvest is coming. If this episode spoke to you, please share it with someone who you think might need some extra hope today. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a conversation like this one. I'm Jennice Chewlin, La Reina of Joy, and this has been another episode of the Audacity of Joy podcast. We'll see you on the next one.